Hi everyone, today's video is how I do cat's eyes in pastels. I had a few requests to make some focus videos on eyes. I did one of my cheetah portrait, but I thought that because Mocha has beautiful colours on, well, her eyes and her fur and her markings, which I am going to make a separate video on as well, so I thought that this would also make a good focus video for the cat eye tutorial. So what you can see I'm resting my hand on here is something called Glassine. It's really important. It just means that you don't get the oils of your skin onto your paper, and you don't also obviously smudge your work, so that's a must-have for me. So what I start doing is I get a really sharp pencil and I'm just outlining the basic shape of the pupil and then the shape of the eye itself. I've slowed this video down even more so than my other videos, and that's so that you can see how I keep rotating the pencil and how I do the individual pencil strokes themselves. So you'll see I actually twist and rotate the pencil a lot as I'm using it, and what that means, it just enables you to keep a sharper point. Because Pastelmat has got that, it's not gritty, but it's that textured surface. If you keep rotating your pencil, it will help to keep it sharpened. There is obviously, keeping a sharp point on pastels is a lot harder than say colour pencils, but if you rotate it and you get into that habit of doing that frequently, it just means that you don't have to sharpen your pencils as much. Sometimes on my videos you'll see I'll just do one eye at a time, but for this one I outline them both at the same time. Now, one big difference I did with Mocha is in the reference photo her pupils were really small. Her owner wanted the pupils to be a little bit bigger, so because her eyes are the main focus of this, so I did change the pupil size in a photo editing software, sent it back to the client, and they confirmed that that was what they were looking for. So things like that you can tweak, but just obviously make sure that the client is happy before you go ahead and do it on your portrait. Now, when you're drawing eyes, not all of the time, but most of the time, the edges that are closest to the eyelid is darker. So you want to make sure that you capture those darker areas and then gradually get to a lighter colour towards the pupil. That's normally how it is. Now, obviously not always, pay really close attention to your reference photo, but in this case with Mocha's eyes that is the case, and by achieving and focusing on capturing that dark to light, you will then create that globe, that round 3D effect of the eye. A big tip when you're drawing anything in pastels is you want to avoid creating mud. Now, what you mean by that is you don't want to be mixing all these colours on your base layers and not achieving the final colour that you want. So if I was to be applying a darker yellow ochre, browner colour first and then tried putting my yellows on top, I might not be able to get it as vibrant as what I am here. I'm really wanting to capture that yellow colour, which is why I put the yellow down first and then put my yellow ochres, my browns, and you can see at times I'm using a green on top because I didn't want to mud those colours in with the yellow. I wanted the yellow to be the base colour first. So here, for instance, this is what I mean. If I was to put this colour down first as my base layer and then the yellow on top, the yellow wouldn't necessarily be as vibrant as by doing it the way that I have done it and putting down my yellow layer first. Now, obviously not all eyes may have lighting like this, but for something similar, if your reference photo looks how Mocha's eyes and her position of her head is, that is typically what you will see, is that it will be darker along the edges, so make sure that you capture that. Now, also it is important to pay really close attention to the reference photo and understand the colours that you see. Now, I do not list the exact colours I'm using, and that's purely because if someone else is using a completely different brand of pencils, you can still get the same outcome. So I don't want people to watch my videos and think, well, I don't have the exact same supply so I can't do it, because that is really not the case. As long as you get your lights bright enough and your darks dark enough, the colour will come with more practice and more the more that you draw. A card in the corner for a video that I made on how to pick your colour if that is something that you are struggling with. So you can see that I don't use anything else other than the pencils to blend each layer. When you are blending with your pencils, use a really light hand, and it just applies like a glaze that you would normally see in acrylics and that sort of thing, and it just tints the colour. by using a really light hand, you can blend the layer of pencil that you've just applied to the layers underneath. This is my white Pitt pastel pencil, and that is a really light hand that I've just used there. As you can see, it didn't appear white, it's appeared as a lighter yellow, and that's because I've applied a really light hand with that white, but because it is a light hand, it's blended with the yellower shades underneath to create an even lighter yellow. So that is also something, as long as you use a light hand, I go back to what I've just said, and it acts more like a glaze rather than that pencil coming across as pure white. Now obviously if I was to put more pressure on that pencil, you would then get a white mark, but because you are using it as a light hand, you can create a lighter version of the colour underneath. So my brightest whites here in the eye, you obviously, as I've just said, you apply slightly more pressure on the pencil. Now if you want to make sure that you preserve the white and get them as bright as you possibly can, if the highlight is particularly bright, then you want to be putting these highlights down first, and that will make sure that you obviously get as whiter pigment as you can without having to make sure that you're putting it over the top of already, you know, my yellower base colours there. So that is something that you can also do. So the process for the other eye is exactly the same, layering, putting your base colours down first. Now obviously here you'll now have your sets of colours in front of you. If there is a strong shadow in your reference photo, the eyes can be of a different colour, but Mocha, the lighting was very equal, so both eyes were of a similar tone and colour. So the process is the same. I'm going to put in the yellower base down first, darkening the edges, and that's because the eye is set ever so slightly further back and the eyelid is cast in a shadow, so it's important to capture that to create that 3D rounded effect that I mentioned earlier. So this is a Caran pencil here. They are that much softer, so they blend really well. This is a green Derwent, so it's not a vibrant green, but it's just that right colour between the yellow and the browner yellow to blend that colour together, because as I mentioned before, I'm just using the pencils to blend on this. There's nothing else, there's no soft tools, I'm not using my fingers at all. If you pick up a pencil, you apply it to your paper and it's not the right colour, it really doesn't matter. Use a colour that you've used before and just go over it with a light hand and it will blend out to the previous layers. So again, you can see here another warmer brown in between the yellow and the brown colour range. Going back with the colour now that I used for my base layer, and that's so that I can blend out that darker edge that I've created back to my base layer that I first put down. Of course you could use some blending, some blending tools, some soft tools or a blending stump, but I actually find when you're working, especially in a small area like this where you're paying really close attention to the subtle differences between lights to darks, that sometimes those blending tools can actually pick up the pastel and remove some of that very subtle layering that you've spent so much time putting down. That is why I prefer to use the pencils for something like this, because these eyes are small. If you look at the size of the pencil there at the end, the sharp point, these are quite small, but I've managed to fit in so much detail because I've been working with a really sharp point throughout. So you don't want to then use a blending tool and blend out a large area accidentally, because you've just undone all that layering process that you spent so much time doing. So now I'm going to start adding where my highlights are, and you can see here how I'm using the pencil, that I'm putting that much more pressure down. This eye was slightly more in shadow than the other, so the highlight was not as bright as the other eye. And this is more of a cooler, very light grey. It's a soft transition, but that highlight just underneath that whitest highlight was that subtle differences in tone, so it's that much darker than a white. Now I'm just reinforcing that shadow on top. Another thing to bear in mind is if you are putting your white highlights in and you don't think they're bright enough, it's quite often because you haven't got the colour around it dark enough. So like what I've just mentioned there about me darkening the area above the eyelid, just by me darkening that, it's automatically made that white pop out even more. And when you see me use my black pencil here, I'm just making sure that I've got the pupil the right shape and the outline of the eye right. And that's just so that when you've been working on an area, you can obviously go over that colour ever so slightly. So every so often, make sure that you reinforce this darker colour. It also helps to make sure that if you've got your darkest values in, that you get your other values in correct, because sometimes you put in a dark colour, and it makes you realise that therefore your lights next to it are not light enough. So what I'm doing now is I'm starting to add the lighter areas around the eyelid itself. So these are the finishing, the final details, I guess, that make the eyes that much nearer completion. And I'm applying a really light grey tone here, just as a base layer. This is then this is a darker grey that I'm then mixing on top. And that darker colour will be the colour that is closest to the black outline, and that's just obviously where a shadow has been cast. So it's just paying really close attention to details like that, not putting one solid colour down. And this is a really small area, this little bit here, but by still making sure that you spend as much time on these little areas, as a whole, once you work more towards your portrait and through it, that is what will create a much more realistic portrait in the end, is paying attention to these kinds of details. I've had quite a lot of messages asking if I have a Patreon channel. I don't at the moment, but it's something that I am looking to do this year and potentially quite soon. So if that is of interest, I would really love to hear from you, either in the comments below or drop me an email via my website. So my initial thoughts are videos between an hour and 3 hours long. Any longer than that and I'd probably break it up into 2 parts. So yeah, that would be a whole project, and then we could also have some focus videos like these cat eyes, or dog ears or anything like that, and I could make them that much longer and therefore that much slower footage. So let me know your thoughts, I'd really appreciate it. I hope this video was of use. I'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up if it was of use, and subscribe and hit the bell button so you get notified of future content. And I'll next be uploading on Saturday. Bye!